All right, today we're going to talk about that really delicate, sometimes thrilling, and honestly, sometimes dangerous journey from being deep friends to becoming something more. It's a huge gamble, right? One a lot of us think about, but very few actually attempt. So what really happens when you decide to risk it all?
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? And we're going to dive into it through the story of Ava and Ryan. They were friends who decided to cross that exact line. And in doing so, they had to find out if what they'd built for 10 years was strong enough to survive a one-month experiment.
So for over a decade, their friendship was this constant, solid thing. For Ava in particular, Ryan was her safe harbor. You know, that predictable, super loyal person in all the chaos of life. It was easy, it was comfortable, and it felt completely secure. And that kind of history, well, it's the foundation, but as we'll see, it can also be the biggest thing to get in the way.
But you know how it goes. That comfortable safety was about to get a major shakeup. And it all started not with some big dramatic gesture, but with just a single conversation. A conversation that would literally change everything about their relationship.
Yup, just one sentence. With those words, Ryan basically said the quiet part out loud. He introduced this possibility that just hung there in the air, creating what felt like ripples of unease in Ava's superordered world. You see, for him, it was this huge moment of vulnerability. But for her, it was a moment that threatened the very stability she loved so much. And just like that, Ava was at this massive crossroads. She could just say no, try to pretend the conversation never even happened, and keep their friendship exactly the way it was. Or she could take a leap of faith into the complete unknown and see what this more could actually be.
She chose the unknown, and that decision led to this tentative first kiss that officially kicked off their little experiment. And it felt sweet and familiar. Of course it did, it was them. But it was also entirely new, a total game changer that basically had to rewire a decade of platonic muscle memory in a single instant.
So this leads them into the next phase, this really cautious exploration where they're trying to figure out this bizarre new territory between friendship and romance and, see if this new feeling could actually stick around.
The first couple of weeks were, well, a total whirlwind of what Ryan started calling official dates. They were doing all these small, romantic things, going to an art exhibit, having a picnic in the park, the kind of stuff they never, ever did as just friends. And that novelty? It was intoxicating.
But that initial excitement, that honeymoon phase, it started to wear off. The moment it really hit was when Ryan brought up planning a future vacation together, which, for a new couple, is a pretty natural next step. But for Ava, it triggered this pang of anxiety about long-term commitment.
So her hesitation, which she framed as, wanting to protect what they had, created the first real point of friction between them. And it revealed this really fundamental difference in their pacing. He was all in, ready to build a future, while she was terrified of losing the safety of their past.
And all that underlying friction, it eventually led to a pretty major collision. A moment where the old habits from their friendship just smashed head-on into their new romantic expectations. And suddenly, what used to be acceptable just wasn't anymore. The real turning point was this argument they had after Ava showed up late and was totally distracted by work. Ryan called out a pattern that he'd always accepted as her friend but just couldn't accept as her partner, her tendency to always put her demanding career before their time together. The rules had completely changed.
And this argument, it perfectly lays out their core conflict. On one side, you've got Ava. Her identity is so tied to her career, and she has this deep fear of losing control. And on the other side, you have Ryan, who isn't asking her to quit her job, but he needs her emotional presence to build a shared future, to build an us.
So after an argument that heavy, one that reveals such fundamental truths, well, it led them to a really quiet, really painful, but ultimately a mutual conclusion.
It was Ava who was the first one to actually voice that difficult truth. With her voice trembling, she admitted that their whole romantic experiment, it just wasn't working. It couldn't bridge the gap between who they were as friends and who they needed to be as partners.
And Ryan's pained agreement, well, that was all it took. It sealed the end of their romantic attempt. The verdict was in. The experiment was officially over.
So, the romance is done. But what about the decade of friendship that it was all built on? This is the most crucial question of all, right? Can you truly go back to the way things were?
Well, the transition back was not seamless. Not at all. Their once easy dynamic was just gone, and in its place was this really awkward strain.
Every inside joke, every look they shared was now kind of tinged with the memory of what they tried to be and what they'd lost.
But they did find a way forward. It just wasn't easy. It took this really deliberate, kind of painful process. First, they had to take some much-needed space to heal on their own. Then, they had to find the courage to slowly, tentatively, start talking again. And finally, the hardest part, rebuilding trust. Not romantic trust, but trusting that the friendship itself could stand on its own 2 feet again.
So, in the end, their friendship did survive, but it was forever changed. They learned that some lines, once you cross them, they can never be fully erased. They just had to build something new on the other side of it, together, as friends who honestly understood each other more deeply than they ever had before.
And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question. Ava and Ryan, they found their way back, but their story really makes you wonder, is the potential for finding something more worth the risk of permanently changing a friendship you cherish? It's a gamble with no easy answer.